I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Yalukit Willem clan of the Boonwurrung people, and pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any elders from other cultures who may be with us tonight. ACMI is so proud to be partnering with the Jackalope Art Collection for their presentation of their Rain Room here in St Kilda, and it's so wonderful for Melburnians to have the opportunity to see this work, which is so famous now and so well loved, and has been playing in so many different locations around the world since it was launched in London in 2012. It's clearly a major undertaking to install and operate a work of this kind, and so we really take our hats off to the Jackalope Group for their ambition and the initiative they took to bring this remarkable work to Melbourne. Tonight we have the pleasure of hearing from one of the creators of the work, Hannes Koch. He will do a short presentation and then be joined by Fenella Kernebone to have a further conversation about the work, and I'm sure there'll be an opportunity for questions if you have them. So Hannes is the co-founder with Florian Ortkrass of Random International, and Random International are a collaborative studio for experimental practice within contemporary art. They were founded in 2005, and today they work with large teams of diverse and complementary talent out of studios in London and in Berlin. Their work explores the human condition in our increasingly mechanised and digital world through the creation of emotional and yet physically intense and participatory experiences. Fenella is head of curation for TEDx Sydney, responsible for leading the programming for one of the largest TEDx events in the world. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with Fenella from her extensive career as a producer, presenter, and MC across a wide range of media, including TV, radio, and podcasts. So please join me in welcoming Hannes to the stage.
Thank you. Okay. Hello. Good afternoon, morning. I don't even know. Can I have my image? My thing? Yeah, I'm Hannes. I had talk title confusion with what I'm going to talk. I don't have confusion with what I want to talk about briefly or how I want to set the stage for our conversation later. But I was confused with how to name it. I think in our telephone conference with Fenella, we thought about. I think I named it something like sentient architecture or something. What happened? Basically, what we're concerned with or excited about, or both, me and Flo. At Random is the impact of digital on our life, on our human condition, mostly the emotional impact. And I think with a work like Rain Room, once you go a step further from the sort of theatrics and the visual impact, what it also is, it is a sentient space in some way. It pretends to be. It's a space that reads your physical presence. And that is something which you can pretty much, it's interesting to translate that into architecture. That's what buildings are already doing and are increasingly going to do. And for us, the question is how do we as humans relate to that? What does that do to us? And why do we react in a particular fashion? And how do we react to sentient spaces, to spaces that pretend to read us, that show certain reactions? But first of all, a quick introduction to the studio. This is our London space. We have 20 people there from all sorts of different backgrounds and disciplines, engineering, programming, art historians, accountants, and so on. And this is our Berlin office. Thanks to the lunatics in the British government, we were forced to open a second studio. This is in market, if you like, be lucky that you're not too closely associated with those people anymore here in Australia. So just, man. No, me and Flo are both German, and it's frightening how difficult they make it to run a studio there. It's as if we had nothing better to do than opening a whole copy-paste version of our London studio in Berlin. This is that's last year's photo, but that's sort of the kind of group of people we have and that, you know, traveling around the world. We have water specialists, we have a whole rain room team working on that, and our work increasingly becomes architectural or shown in an architectural context as sculpture. And this is something we get very excited about, because there is a difference in putting something into a museum or into a collector's home to in a public space where people can't avoid it. It's terrifying and really exciting. So this plug-in human is the title that I for this sort of brief overview that I chose in the end, coming from the heroes at Archigram, who did the plug-in city. But for us, of course, the human is the center. That's the center of our attention, not the environment it lives in or how the machine functions. It's the human that experiences a space, that experiences a spatial reaction to its presence, and that has an impact, and it's an interesting impact. This is a work we've done 12 years ago. It's our first kinetic work, which isn't entirely a spatial reaction. It's objects that react to your presence. And they in very, very simple ways mimic human behavior. So they literally mirror you. And they do that in a very reduced manner, but they do it, they try to be, they try to do nothing that humans can't do. So they try to not be very robotic. And through that, immediately, people almost need to feel related or in relationship to them. And that was the previous one was the sort of exhibition shot. This is what actually happens, that people start performing for the installation. This was not staged. And we thought it was a really interesting thing. This was neither staged nor planned, that reaction, but it taught us something in that there seems to be I think it's a bit too negative on it, but almost like a desperate need for us to connect to our environment in some way and to feel seen. And this is basically a full role reversal. People start to perform for the installation. And I think it's a bit of a cognitive Stockholm syndrome. And I explain a bit later what that is, because that relates, for me anyway, straight into phenomena that we're currently experiencing and that are not so light-hearted or lightweight. We really like to engage our reward, our sort of neuronal reward system with things that are pleasing or that make us feel good about ourselves, like this woman who tries to outsmart the tracking system from audience. She thinks she's smarter, she feels very much in control of the situation, and it elevates her that she thinks she understood how the camera tracking works. And this is the same reaction, human reaction, that makes us click. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is an offer for some really simplistic game that people hit 3 times OK on Facebook. By every OK, they give away another layer of their private data onto third-party servers, and that absolutely screws up democracy all over this planet at the moment. And that sucks. And it's really fun at the same time. And that's what I meant with the cognitive Stockholm syndrome. We really fall in love with the shit that screws us up. I shouldn't swear on stage. And this is something really interesting for us to explore. This is a work, Presence and Erasure, which we've recently launched. We've worked a long time with the recognition of body in space, but also with sort of temporary portraiture of what that does to people, to exploit and explore our sort of built-in narcissism a little bit. And this is a machine which scans the space the whole time and then randomly picks out portraits of people and blows them up and posterizes them and prints them out in really large, in a really large format they're visible for about, I don't know why somebody's shouting, but they're visible for about 30, 40 seconds, then they fade out. You have absolutely no control about whether you're chosen or not by this machine, but you're very pleased when you are. And that, again, corresponds one-to-one to, I don't know if you follow that discussion, but this Hoover app, which sucked data from all sorts of social media platforms, 3.5 billion images, I think, for face recognition without any consent or permit. They're used in law enforcement now, immediately locating data. And it's this involuntary, ubiquitous of being filmed, being looked at, being seen by machines. It should make us worried, but we feel very pleased by it. And that's very simple. That's very simple processes in the human brain which are being exploited. And I think our point isn't so much to, I think it's enough just to mention that, to highlight that fact and to sort of amplify that a little bit. Sentient architecture is something that we try to exploit and explore in our sculptural work. This is a work for the Great Ormond Street Hospital for Children, where we try to give the building an expression, an actual, to pretend that the building has actual soul or has a heart. I don't know, it wasn't so literal, but that there is something alive in the building. So this is a huge, it's not that huge. Can we turn it down a little bit, please? It's a very nondescript object which we try to make relatable only through movement. So we've studied manatees and jellyfish and so on. So we wanted to give this the closest to biological motion that we can have, and it has 3 eyes, if you like. It has 3 points where it sees people and then slowly comes to them. And you only need to do so much that people immediately read and interpret something as being alive. So they go like, oh, it's curious, it's aggressive, it's shy, and you only need to start that conversation with a few very simple gestures, and you immediately build a rapport between the visitor and the sculpture, and that's something extremely enjoyable. So here you have about 200,000 inpatient or outpatients coming in, most of them children, and you have a bunch of staff coming into the building every day, and we really wanted to connect them to the building in a very emotional manner without being overly dramatic. And I think it's something that changes over time, and for us it's a way to build a building, a static or lifeless structure, a way to express itself. I'm almost done now, but with Rain Room, that's where I wanted to go with this. It comes to this thing that I think the first time that Barbican in London showed it, and before when it still existed in paper, they had this whole campaign on the tube where it says, how would it feel to control the weather? So they give you this megalomaniac kind of, I'm here, and it reacts to me, but I control it. And that's generally this very elevating feeling that you actually and genuinely have. I have that in the it exists around me, and it parts for me, and so on and so forth. And that's not at all what it is. It's completely controlling the way you walk. It makes you utterly predictable. It's standardizing the way you hold your head, the speed you walk with. It slows you down when you're too fast, and so on. It's like it's a very, very subtle way of controlling how we are in space. And I think that you will find a lot in architecture in the future. Already now, but increasingly so, choosing which way elevators go and so on. It's this almost nudging, which takes away a lot of this free, or how do you say, perceived free will. It just tells you, buildings tell you where to go, when to go there, how fast you get there, and where to not go. And I think that's an interesting consideration and interesting thing to bear in mind when you move through life. That there is, with increasing monitoring, there is an increasing potential for control, and that's where I think this gets very interesting. And this is where I'm welcoming Fenella on stage. Thank you very much.
As part of the performative aspect of Rain Room, let's keep clapping for Hannes Koch, shall we? Hi.
Is this the right side now? Yeah.
It's a big chair for my big ego, both of ours. Okay, hands up if you haven't been into Rain Room yet. You are in for a treat. Oh. You're going to know what it's like to feel in control and also somewhat being controlled at the same time. Hannes, amazing to hear about your work. Thank you. This is your first time to Australia, is that right?
Yes.
How is it? Are you okay?
I love it. Yeah. Absolutely love it.
You got here a couple
of
days
ago. Very unexpected, I have to say.
Why is that?
I imagined it to be. Can I be honest?
No.
No. Okay.
We've got really thin skin. Be careful.
In where I come from, when you hear about Australia, you hear about Sydney a lot, and it's a bit. I don't really want to offend anybody, but it's a bit flaky, the way Sydney is portrayed. It's it's all beach and sun and bodybuilders, and I think, and I did not, and people don't talk much about Melbourne. And when I came here, it's extremely pleasant, I think. It's properly solid. It's a bit like New York or Chicago. It's like this versus LA.
You guys okay with that? Because I'm actually from Sydney and I'm not a bodybuilder. So just watch what you're saying, all right?
Yeah, okay. But I love it here. I think it's amazing. I love the climate.
I mean, I sort of asked this because we're here, we're in this hotel. It's in a hotel or next door on the car park. It's fancy pants, and when you go and check it out, you'll see what I'm talking about. When you see it positioned in this space, in this part of town, architecturally, physically, what do you see and feel? Because you've been to, obviously this is your artwork, so how does it feel or present to you?
It was hard to imagine when Lewis and his team proposed this site. We were like, on a beach, yes, go. That sounds awesome. And but neither me or Flo had been here, and I think the architecture makes a huge difference to have a work like this, to have somebody go to this. Through the commitment to build a building for it that's unbelievably humbling and amazing.
Could you set us up and give us a bit of an understanding about then the different way that it is represented around the world, from the original Barbican, showing to what we have here? It's different. It's different, to say the least. Yeah.
Well, it's I think the context and I think the experience itself for that to be congruent and in the way that we want it to be, everything else around it has to be a bit different and site-specific. But I think from the beginning we were quite interested in finding people. We knew that we had a limited number of rain rooms that we were going to build, and we knew that we would prefer, in the long term, permanent iterations of it without any knowledge of or real understanding of what that would actually mean. And so I think the Sharjah Art Foundation acquired one in 2013, and I think 3 weeks after acquiring it, we went to Sharjah. We sat in the foundation and had a chat about the architecture, and then we really liked their buildings. By then they just had new architecture, and 10 minutes later, the architect of those buildings, she was asked to the table and sat there, and we literally sketched the building, and that was an amazing experience. And we were like, okay, it's basically downhill from here, and with March doing this building, they kept the level, and I think it really sets an amazing precedent do that. And I think slowly with the remaining rain rooms, we're not in a massive hurry, but we're looking for a similar experience. And it's, I mean, if you've been like it's just a beautiful experience to come up there. It's like this weird, it's a concrete, almost brutalist car park, and then they've built this. It's like almost like a sculpture itself, the building, and I think that's amazing.
I want to talk about some of the big issues, of course, that you've touched on already in your talk, and obviously about control and the way that the body is being read by the architecture and vice versa. But when you walk through now, this is your artwork, what do you feel when you personally are in this space, moving through with the rain not on you? Or like, I'm just kind of curious about your experience of it now after sort of almost 10 years since it was first staged.
I think the first thing is always to go, am I getting soaked? Because that can happen if you wear the wrong black clothes or something.
Really?
Or if it's not well looked after.
I don't actually have any other colour.
Yeah. It's the wrong black clothes, not beautiful black clothes that you do.
Oh, thank you.
And I mean, really, the team here, it's like brand new. You know, it's you come here after 6 months, it's like out of the box. It's amazing. And then I personally forget about it. I'm just enjoying it.
Yeah.
And that's that I can't say that of all of our work. I think with Rain Room, it's because it's a very physical, very intense, emotional or soothing experience. I don't have to think a lot about it.
It's true. There's something really meditative about it when you walk through. But then all of a sudden, you talked about this before. You have this moment where you realise that you are actually being controlled by the rain. If you don't want to be rained on, you need to move through it in a particular way.
But the mean thing is that happens but that happens. I don't think people think about that. It happens very instinctively. It's like it's a very do you say that?
Subconscious thing.
Subconscious, and it happens under the radar. It's like, oh yeah, no. It's like this nudging, this subtlety.
Was that always intentional for you, the way that we go through the space? I mean, obviously this happens in other works that you're doing, but you consciously wanted to make us question how we walk through the architecture, how we walk through our cities and spaces through this kind of physical representation of the rain.
Not at all.
No?
No.
What was it?
I think that the original impetus was just this fantasy of trying to understand or trying to imagine how something feels, to almost build and there was this like, I think we had this as a work on paper or in a computer, on silicon, if you like, in a computer chip for 4 years before it was built. And you go through these things and you go like, okay, literally the first thought that you came back to all the time while pursuing the actual practicalities of getting it realized was this fantasy of being cocooned by a space and having this heightened sense of self or perception when you think you should be threatened or endangered by getting wet. It's a sort of not really dangerous thing, but not this sort of almost dissonance between the expectation and what's actually happening. And we thought that would be a really interesting experience and very powerful. And I think that's what we came back to. But then, of course, you go through these thoughts of, this is probably how people in some parts of the world will experience weather. Yeah. In like X years'
they won't
time.
have rain, for example. They'll have to experience it in an artificial capacity. Yeah.
And not only rain, but this is how we have to mediate our environment. It's you go into these sort of matrix fantasies a little bit, and unfortunately, I think that's been, look around you. It's not far from
what the future potentially will be. I know I was thinking as I was walking through, when I went through last week when I was in Melbourne, and I'm in Melbourne, I'm still here in Melbourne, how about that? But when I was walking through, I had this sort of sudden kind of transportation back to being a kid and reading the Bible, and then like Moses parting the water, and here I am, and there's all that power, if that makes sense. Then all of a sudden I'm being told what I need to do in order to not get wet. And then I thought, wow, it's such a privilege to be able to be in these types, like all of these kind of things emerge, and it's a work that has the capacity to help us question who we are and how we live, particularly in a city or a country that's had so much devastation from rains to bushfires recently.
I think that you know, in Los Angeles we had and that's also how what's interesting for us to do this for a number of years and go through this logistic effort. But something like in Los Angeles, when we put it up at the LA County Museum in November, it hadn't rained since I think April or May that same year. So there literally was a family with a child, and they shoved it out. They outperformed the tracking. They shoved it into the rain just to go like, it's for the baby to experience what rain is like.
And they'd never experienced rain before.
Yeah, they hadn't.
Tell me about the one in the UAE, United Arab Emirates. That's, you know, a place that doesn't experience a huge amount of rain. What is that like tell me a bit about that one.
I think that was such a one-liner to, you know, put a rain room in the desert, because when we opened it, everybody was like, oh, it's going to go to Dubai, it's going to go to Dubai. They immediately go for it. And we were extremely happy that the Sharjah Art Foundation, they have an excellent program. I think it's one of the best cultural institutions in the world. That they acquired it, and they took their time building a whole building. And I think that's when we started. And going through Dubai, I don't know who's been there, but it's mental. It's absolutely insane when you come there. These like 5-mile high buildings, and everything is automated and climatized. I mean, in like 30 years' time, one doesn't talk about it too much, but they won't be able to be outside for long stretches of the year. It's all underground, climatized, and so on. So that's where we started thinking about this automated building, this architecture which reads you, all the elevator systems in the Burj Al Khalifa and so on. And we explored all that over the years when we were there. It took them 5 years, I think, to build the rain room building. And I think that has much more mileage for me in terms of an engagement or way of thinking about the work than this idea, okay, it's, you know, because this isn't really rain, you know, it's not really rain.
It's recycled, you know, it's water, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very sort of minimalist, formalized version of it.
But this is the future potentially, even though it's an artwork and you're going to experience it, but this potentially, as you've said, this could be how we interact with our environment or our climate that we're not able to, you know, it could be a history lesson for some kids in the future. That's kind of, it touches on all these ideas.
Yeah. I mean, look at, in Dubai, of course, they like next door neighbor to Sharjah, they go skiing in the desert. So they literally take this to the extreme and make it entertainment, and then, but that in itself is quite interesting as well. So they probably go into rain and go like, this is really boring. It's not enough rain, it's not big enough, or something like that. I don't know. It's like, but for us, of course, that's quite almost like a compliment.
Just a sort of boring technical question, but I mean, obviously technology over the last 10 years or so has transformed and changed. It's still the same work though, isn't it? The way that the sensors work. Why have you consciously chosen to leave it as it is and not find a new way to express it, if that makes sense?
Because it would be so tacky to make a wide room with red rain or something. No, we just can't.
Well, that would be,
no, because I think it was good as it is, and I think the back end change. Like I met Jason and his team yesterday for the first time, The Guardian, and it's like they've taken Rain Room to the next level, and they are still. I think. Like we really want to bring them together with the guys in Sharjah just to compare notes and probably curse me and my colleagues for coming up with that. And there's a lot of stuff which we permanently improve, and you know what's in here in the pavilion has nothing to do with this sort of teenage engineering in the Barbican, which was like literally sort of homemade plumbing. And that's good that it's not like that. And we're still, like, we're exploring, I think we're still ahead of the tech curve in that we would love to try a new way of tracking for technical reasons. The permanent side, where this is going to go to, in downtown Melbourne, that we will have, or we know already that we're maxing out spatial constraints in terms of room height and stuff, and that stuff where technology will save us, unlike environment. I think. And
Do you think that's true? Technology will save us?
Huh?
You just said technology will save us. Is that something that you firmly believe?
No, absolutely
No,
not.
right.
No, but in this case, yes.
Yes, okay.
They will, they will allow us to make it as big as we can in a very constrained space, and that's good. No, I have no.
No, good. Chuck your phones out, everybody.
Yeah.
Don't take it. Well, actually, talking about phones, it's funny because when I went through the other day, my mate and I, we basically just took photos the entire time. And for a moment there, I thought, I'm not actually experiencing this. So we're living constantly in this world where we're sort of like we're managing the real, and then we're also shoving it on Instagram and on Facebook. And you're gonna do it too. Trust me. Don't feel guilty about this. And I kind of was curious. And the same, you showed us the picture of the woman trying to outsmart the sensors as well, and that was being filmed. Like we're all, and then the other mediated space with the photographs on the wall. Like how we are interacting, the role that this art actually plays in helping us understand how we're actually living in this digitized space. It's pretty constant.
It is, and I think the first iteration of Rain Room in the Barbican and then MoMA a few months later was wild because it was the advent of Instagram.
Yeah.
Twitter was just sort of on the way out, and then it was all photo-based, and people, it was literally, it's not real if it's not on Facebook.
Is Twitter out?
No, it sort of, but sort of photographically. I don't know what these, and I think it only dawned on us that it was almost offensive that people, you spend years breaking your back to bring this into the world as a physical experience. It's not projected, it's not, VR crap, it's real. And then people go like, they live in it through a phone, and it's like through a screen, and it is offensive. We made a work in the same year that became so popular on Instagram, which was completely unintentional. We were commissioned in Germany by the Ruhr-Triennale to do a work with water, and we made like this massive tower, which was like a downpour of, I think, 40,000 liters a minute. And you got absolutely soaked in it. There was no tracking whatsoever. It was a very powerful storm experience. And we really, at that point, we felt we need to make a point that people will literally break their stupid cameras when they go in it, which of course they did. But now iPhones are waterproof, so it's doesn't help.
It doesn't help anymore. Did you get anybody complaining?
No.
So it's your own fault, guys.
No, we didn't listen.
Yeah.
We were like.
But I mean, it's kind of part of it though, now that this is the world that we're living in. So we're interacting in architecture with our phones, in a space that is digital at the same time as physical. So these artworks are a way to help us understand how we're living in the cities, in the spaces, and the future space that we have. That's what you're hoping to do.
I think they help me understand almost. It's like it's a sort of self-serving exercise in a way, because I think we're living like in all things, data and automation and digitization and algorithmification. I think we live in a time right now which is similar to the 1950s, where you were only a good oncologist when you were smoking in your practice or in a bank or something, when, it was cool and fun to smoke. And I think it's completely unregulated the way, and inconsiderate to a really lethal degree, how we treat privacy, how we treat our own data, and how we misread or are simply neglecting the potential for abuse of data. And I think we're in it is a bit like this addictive, there's a lot of parallels in this addictive tendency, but that's what all the big technology companies are actively and consciously exploiting. So I think all these movements of healthy and sane use of technology and so on is worthwhile. And I think art increasingly has a role to play here, because these developments these conflicts are being of commerce attacking our very emotional core. That they do that with the same means as cigarettes, alcohol, booze, any kind of addictive substances try to hit our brains. It's literally the same process. And I think it's a good idea to start thinking about how we can fight back using the same means. And that translates for me one-to-one. I don't know if it's apparent, but I think it translates one-to-one into all developments that we're currently experiencing with, Johnson, Trump, democracy. It's the same sort of attention economy that is being played out in front of our and in our emotional experience.
And we don't have much time. I mean, look, we don't have enough time to stop and just think, and to experience. There's a lot of, like, this constant download of information.
We don't want to.
No.
It's so exciting to go to hit the next episode. It's like, that's exactly it.
So we need to be able to go into a space, and I think this is kind of where what you're saying, sort of, when I hear you, it's like to be able to stop, to go into a rain room, to, like the work that you showed us in the hospital, the children's hospital, where you actually are interacting with a thing that is potentially sentient, as you're saying, lets you question, but it just, the opportunity for you to stop and think, we're being watched, we're allowing ourselves to be watched the entire time. Let's let the art allow us to think about what it means to us, I suppose.
And the physicality, I think that's a huge thing for us, like, I think we have 1 or 2 works which are projected without any reactive component, but there needs to be some physical component to help, almost just, that will save us, the being, that's what makes us unique, not our brain, but the way it's embedded into feeling and audiovisual emotional system, or biochemical system. And I think the physicality of things like that is paramount. If you compare it to sort of virtual reality or something which just pretends to your whole system that you are somewhere where you're not. Here you are really somewhere, and you see something, you can touch it. And I think that at this point in time, I think that's quite important. It might change.
It's an interesting point you bring up. So mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. All
Mixed, I'm not so sure about.
Right.
That almost scares me. Like if I've got 2 small kids, and it's like, VR, virtual reality, I can see all it's like in WALL-E or whatever this film is, where they're all like zonked out fatzos sitting in living on a, in a virtual, because the real world is so depressing. And
So you feel some trepidation about the way that form of technology is starting to enter our lives. Is that what
if it becomes like, in 10 years' time or whatever, you just have a pair of glasses and it compensates for the shittiness of the real world, I think that's really dangerous.
Okay, so this idea that we
or
have...
scary. It's not dangerous, I don't know that, but I think that's really scary.
Okay. So the idea then for you at Random is about having the physical space. We interact with the object in the physical space, so we can understand the space, the skin that we're in. That's paramount.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think that adds that really adds to the realness of your experience, of my experience anyway, and I think that's really important. Yeah.
Tell me a bit more about the work in the hospital, because that one's interesting. Because I mean, you talk about sort of, the way that we, like even before when you said security and the 3 eyes that are part of it as well. It's like it's Big Brother watching you, but it's also not. We get to play with it. So what are you sort of playing with here with a work like that?
Again, it's not desperation, but it's our need to connect.
Yeah.
I think that's and again, that translates one-to-one into the cab driver who on the way out here told me that that coronavirus is a thing because the Chinese eat human beings. I'm like, no, that's not a thing. You're fucking crazy. And he was that was a thing. I think the
I don't know where to go.
That in terms of
what's for dinner tonight, ladies? Sorry.
The way of connecting, of reading stuff into other stuff, into our environment. I think that's what makes automation so, and this algorithmification. Oh man,
it's a difficult word. That one.
I'm not a native speaker. That makes that so powerful, and that's something worth investigating. So we had this. We've been working for a long time with a different form of simulating nature with swarm algorithms, which is absolutely fascinating. If you think of 500,000 birds flying in this most minimalist, beautiful formation and not a single crash, it's like, you know, they're just it's perfection. And we try to simulate that, and we used light to do so and so on for years, and it's very pretty and beautiful. And at some point it dawned on us that that swarming behavior is a form of collective behavior, and that is scary AF. It's really scary because it again translates into voting behavior. And you're just swarms are just looking left and right. There's no immediate, like the collective has sentience or seems to have intention or can have, like insects going for food or something, but it can also be a form of cannibalism, like in locusts, that their swarming behavior is driven by a flight, you know, they go away from each other because they eat themselves. And we've tried to translate that, if we could, we would have 500,000 objects performing a choreography in space because it's amazing, but we can't. So we came up with this idea of having 7 really large orbs, basically balloons, not drones, but they're motorized, and we made them fly in autonomously according to a swarm algorithm. So they were avoiding each other, they flew in formation, and then we had a full tracking system on the floor that recognized human body in space, and then the swarm came towards you really slowly, and there was a beautiful choreography by Wayne McGregor, and so on. It was a really interesting experiment for us to watch people, how much they read into really, really simple movement. The chain of association is literally breaking loose. Go like, oh, he's attacking me. You read a lot because that's how we function. It's really simple. That's what the brain needs to sort of make sense of the world around us. We read in, and that's where the increasing automation of our environment becomes, your phones who make you, they dictate how you behave. They make you sleep these days, even with and you build these very emotional relationships because they satisfy something in you. And I think there is that comes down to this level of control. It can be very easily a tool to control. I'm not saying there's somebody who intentionally does so. It's probably more likely that some really stupid machine controls what you do without any intention, but that's nonetheless something we're thinking about.
Tell me a bit more about another work, and Swarm was one of them, but is it called 15 Points? You sort of touched on it a bit before, but the idea not only about control, but about how we understand or perceive what movement actually is. Just describe what this is and how that works for you.
I think so 15 Points is basically based on fast. So after audience, these little mirrors, we really try to understand why exposing people to what seem to be biological movement is so powerful. It's such a powerful marker for connecting somehow, physically, emotionally, and with your body language, rather than you have like some robotic mirrors that wouldn't have done much. So we talked to a neuroscientist in London. He gave a lecture at the studio, and he came up with this, with some research from the Biomotion Lab, where a guy filmed, 1,500 people with light markers to identify and boil down what it takes for human beings to recognize biological human motion as such. So literally you need even less than 15 points, and it's fascinating. You have like literally 15 light points, and you see a walking person. You have a little slider where you develop gender, male, female, body weight, mood, happy, sad, minuscule changes, and you immediately read that. It takes your brain 150 milliseconds to understand that that's biological motion versus robotic. And that's 80 million year old, it comes from pre-dinosaur. It's our ability to read, is that a tiger who's eaten me, or is it just leaves in the wind? And we thought, again, this is really fascinating if you think about robotics, where, when they go a bit beyond this silly Honda guy, how quickly we relate. That will be in our time, when we're old, robots will take care of us and we will emotionally relate to them because we are so desperate for that kind of connection. It's really easy. I mean, they're doing these tests or did these tests in MIT with like giving elderly, lonely people some like almost like a Tamagotchi of some form, and that didn't even imitate a human being, and people cried their heart out. And then you can, you know, discuss, is that a good thing? That there's no human reaction to that. There's no actual feedback. It's just pretense. And I think it's a bit too arrogant or too quick to jump to the conclusion that that's necessarily a bad thing. But to try that, is that a good thing? If you relate to 15 points and go like, hey, that's a guy, that's a woman, that's a, you know, and then it's really weird when it goes back into, you know, we made that into a sculpture. So we made a kinetic, really convoluted artwork with 15 robot arms, which pretends to walk around in space and then goes back into something completely abstract. And it's actually that transition which is most interesting, where you just, it freaks you out because suddenly you're confronted with this, oh, it's actually, you cut this connection. Oh, that's the bit which is, I think, which I hope we will build into sort of almost by means of government regulation, I'm a big fan, to make it evident from time to time that, you know, there is no, that's a machine, you shouldn't, you know, rely on it.
So we need to take the shine off it every now and then, basically. So when we walk through our lives and everything is so smooth and we're in our automated cars in the future and, you know, the bus terminal does this, etc. It all seems seamless and automated, as you're saying, but it needs to have a
from time to
glitch,
time,
basically.
I think from time to time that's good. If you think about deepfakes, you know, it's the kids need to learn how to read those. I don't know if there are ways to do that, but I think that's something we're like seriously exploring, how to debunk that simply, you know, with how can you read a video which is being, you know, purposefully altered for political reasons or whatever, for propaganda or for commercial reasons. How can you read that? And it'll, you know, when they, I think it's just important because I think we're absolutely screwed if we don't tackle those things creatively.
Exactly, because that's the thing that's going to shock us out of the system. It's like walking into rain rooms. Suddenly you start to think about the climate, you think about the downpours we've had recently. All of these things start to remind you of where we are in this space, in, you know, in this city or elsewhere. So it does, it gives you that opportunity. Control, connection, automation. Can I just go back a little bit? Where does it come from with you and Flo? Like, how do you, what is the core of this for you guys? Because you've been working together for, 15 years now or so?
20, yeah.
20 years.
Yeah.
Barely any grey hairs whatsoever.
I think curiosity is a thing. It's like I think curiosity. It's a fairly self-serving exercise to begin with, to go like, oh, it would be cool to have a rain room, and then some nut job art collector goes like, yes, you can build it, and you go like,
or really,
I love them, and it's I really love the pointlessness of this activity. I always loved it, of sculpture, of painting, of drawing and stuff, and I didn't have the balls to study sculpture, which I wanted to do, and then I went like, oh, you know, white middle class, I better do design, and I absolutely hated the non-pointlessness of design. I couldn't stand it. This kind of that it had a purpose and I had to do this and that and so on. So as a revenge, almost to myself, I then chose to actually become a practicing artist and put all the good functional knowledge that we acquired, me and Flo, to really completely pointless use. And then it dawns on you that there is almost like that's a thing that's relevant. I think, you know, it's relevant for other people, and that's where our sort of interest in public art comes from, which is it's hard to bring this stuff into the world because, you know, just on a really practical level, to install 3D sensors in a public space in broad daylight, you're really pushing tech to where it doesn't want to be. It wants to sit in your phone and be all sort of mediated environments, but if you put it out there, that's really hard. But I think it's meaningful. It makes sense, and it's if it helps to. I'm not a big fan of having, you know, overburdening art with too much messaging, but I think if it's got this, if it has to have to do something, if there's any purpose, then it is to rip people out a bit of their sort of daily thing and make them stop.
Yeah. Like when you go to bed later in the night and you sit there and try and remember what you looked at that day, you need to be able to say, that moved me or that did something. I learned something from that.
Because you don't have that after 20 hours on Instagram at all. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't seen my feed yet. Amazing. At Fenella K. Just kidding. So many questions, but you know, this is meant to be a conversation. So if you have a question for Hannes, don't be shy. He likes to have a chat. So there's a microphone running around. While you're thinking about your amazing questions and ideas.
No pressure.
No pressure. You've left the UK, and so has a few other people.
Yeah.
Because they made people do it. Tell me about the team. There's 20 of you that you sort of touched on. You showed us a photograph before. Obviously, it started off with just you two together, and you kind of expand and contract, I guess, when you need to. But one of the team members that you have, I thought was interesting, is a dramaturg. What does the dramaturg do at Random International? It's pretty random. No.
We seem to have a thing. So that's Eloise Reynolds. She's been with us for almost 10 years now. And she's an art historian from the Koch Institute, and she was doing a lot of writing for our gallery, so text writing, and we loved the way she wrote. And it was a sort of impermanent job for her after graduation. And then we needed a studio manager, so she started in a more administrative role. But that's her thing, writing. And then she's, we're already two artistic leads or directors, and I think we've developed this way of working together where it's a distillation process of ideation. And she's extremely helpful in that process. So we have I think the actual artistic or creative bit that happens, that's pretty random and happens a lot in conversation between me and Flo or sketches or something. But then I think the refinement, and often it's another level of filtration, which and purification that she brings to the table, and she helps contextualizing, like when we plan. It's a very, very curatorial role, and I think it's almost like in a art group like ours, you need that kind of dramaturgical approach to make sense of things. If you plan 2 years in advance, that you can, and you have to some degree, you have the ability to move things around. She's sort of helps us to keep that overview.
But I suppose it's more just, if anybody has a question, by the way, just throw your hand up in the air. The way that you guys interact, because you talk a lot about the role of the collective, not only in the art, but also the collective of the people that you work with too. There's you and Flo. You are the ideas of it. But how does that translate to when because you're not all working together. There's a couple of people on different projects at different times. So I was curious just how you manage that and the art job, of course, of being a creative at the same time.
I think it's different. I think it's very much very different from sort of the last generation of these sort of one big name at the front, usually the name of the artist, and then you've got armies of assistants who are
like the Damien Hirst
or
something.
Hirst Coons and so on.
Yeah.
I think we're much more, while we also insist that but that's almost by not merit, but yes, me and Flo are leading that. That's sort of by nature of having done this for 20 years, and we're very supportive of people setting up their own practice after they work with us for a while. But I think we have a much more involved, and we need a much more involved group of people, or groups of people in what we want to realize. So it literally takes a village to raise a child, and I think we are evolving in that. So we're starting to put on production credits for the individual team members, and I think that comes with a certain confidence after a while. I think for 5-10 years ago, we wouldn't have been. We were a bit more stuck up, like, no, pretend that I'm coding this would be just ludicrous. I have learned how to program, but that thing would have exploded a long time ago, not even, so no. And I think it's a very like, at least I can say that. I don't know if they respect us, but probably not so much. But I have tons of respect for them. And in return for making their talent available to us, and to the cause of, to the work, they get paid, of course. We don't have freelancers. We have only permanently employed, or almost only permanently employed staff. But they also, I think we offer something that isn't sort of industry standard, in that there is enormous amounts of creative freedom within your profession. I am not a software engineer. I'm not a mechanical engineer. And therefore they can literally dictate how things pan out. And then that necessitates a lot of learning from me and Flo and adaptation. But I think over the years we've learned how to communicate and how to develop work so that we know this is the closest we can get to it in terms of how something is realized, because we've learned how to speak to the group. That's why it's important to us that we have consistency and sort of continuity in the people we work with.
For sure. Thank you.
I just wanted to ask if you could clarify something I heard a long time ago, that there was this, I haven't experienced the work, but there was this painterly quality to your work, whereas you go into it and it's like going into a painting but not really getting splashed by the paint, but you're naturally immersed in that. And I was wondering if there's any roots to this in the sort of ideation of the Rain Room.
Am I blushing?
I'm not sure.
Very nice. Thank you. I think there is a deep, in our need to connect to ourselves and then to our audiences. I think we're trying to keep things pretty raw. We're not, or analog. Like we're not into sleekness. I don't know, into this kind of polished thing. So there's a total fetishism for this. Every surface is an A surface, but there's also this utter need to reduce in functionality to what we think is important. And I think that's also what sets it probably apart from your regular entertainment kind of, I don't know, Disney experience, with which this is often put into one, art cannot be popular. It's a very infuriating criticism, but it's too much like Disney or something. And I think that's where it stands apart from that a little bit. But it's this, I think we're trying to give it something genuine, and it doesn't always work. But I think if that works, it's very nice to hear.
When doesn't it work? What is that moment for you, or if it's even easy to articulate at all?
It's often in the behavior. Something's not right in the behavior of an object, then it's totally underwhelming. And I think too much slickness is killing it. Like if it looks like there's one light which I can't show, but we're working on a really beautiful outdoor version of our swarm studies, really large, reactive, and so on. As an idea, it totally works. But if you go into the actual design of it, where you have to develop a vandalism-proof bit of tech, the danger of going for it to become not really 90s street lighting is enormous. It's like a minefield, and it takes ages to prototype, to build, and throw away, and then it looks even worse than 90s street lighting and stuff. So I think that's it's behavior and it's surface treatment. I think if you really need to remind yourself to strip it down to the bare necessities of what it should do to people or with the presence of a human being, and then you're sort of trying to stay on that ball.
And not be didactic, if that makes sense. Allow us to interact and find the story.
Yeah, and also find your interpretation of how something behaves, and how something feels. You want to be non-prescriptive in that, I think.
For sure. Sorry, thank you.
I guess the first time I experienced the Rain Room, probably what you were touching on earlier about the control thing. The kind of my immediate reaction was to try and figure out what's happening, like how is it tracking me, what is, like, how can I move and what can I do? and you kind of move around the room and you do it a bit wrong and you get maybe a little bit wet,
Yeah.
which I did. So I guess you were talking about the control and the restriction of your movement, of your speed of movement. Was that an intentional thing, or was that?
No, it's gravity. It's really simple. It's that. You can't outperform gravity. That's all that it is. It takes a drop of water reaches terminal velocity after, like, I don't know, I think 11 meters or something. So yes, if you have a bit more pressure, but it makes minuscule differences. It's largely gravity. So if you walk too fast, then 9.x meter per second or whatever it is, then you get soaked. And then it's the determined by the size of the cocoon around you, which we can control, and that's a matter of you want it to be as close as, so it's arm's length basically. You don't want people to stretch out their hand when they stand still.
The first thing I did was I have quite long arms, and I put out my arms to see how it worked, whether it was tracking me or whether it was tracking everything.
Both. Yes. Yeah.
Wet hands.
A little bit. Yes. Yeah. Wet hand, but this was very too fast. So kids. There was one child in the Barbican who was like, "Mom, I've got magic hands." She related that to, and kids are great with that. They do not go in. They look up. They go like, "No, I'm getting soaked. I'm not going to go in there." And then they go like, "Yeah, you can go." And then they go in like this, and then go like, "Oh, I'm staying dry." And then they run and get absolutely soaked. It's hilarious. So good.
That's super cute. Again, you have questions, hands up. Just one here. Just quickly, this has been in a few countries. Is there any difference between us at all as humans and how we react? Thought you'd say that.
It's a universal thing. I think especially with rain, that's safe to say. Everybody has a relationship with it. Due to absence or too much or something, you have memories of rain or the lack of rain or something. And it's a universal thing. And then and at the same time, you have a very personal relationship with it because of childhood memories, or even if you don't have rain in your home country, chances are that you've been somewhere where you've experienced it and stuff. And I think that's what makes it very universal.
For sure. Thank you.
There are personality differences for sure, if you see that. So you have the sort of confident, I'm going to explore it. It's like this sort of probably cave people typology of the guy who gets eaten first, and then the people who are a bit more careful, and sort of the introvert, extrovert and stuff. But there are about 4 different ways of people approaching it if it's not mediated.
Okay, so we're archetypes, basically.
Yeah,
okay,
I think that you can see. It's a sort of behavior separation machine. But that's the same everywhere.
For sure.
Yet to experience the rain room, but looking forward to it. Got absolutely soaked running this morning, so I got wet. One thing, obviously, lots of visual parts to the installations that you do. Do you do other sensations like sound or other things to mess with people's heads as well?
No, not so much. So to be honest, yes. There's one cheap but awesome trick. And it's not a trick. It's when you work with body and space, at some point, we fairly early on, I think the audience work, that was commissioned by a choreographer, by Wayne McGregor. And we happened to have no idea about dance or contemporary performance. That was in 2008. So we were like, we should probably, he said, I want you to do a kinetic sculpture for a media arts festival he curated at the Royal Opera House. And we figured it was a good idea to work with body and space, with the recognition thereof, and develop this audience work with a view for him to choreograph some dance for it. That never happened because we finished it literally the evening before the opening, so he didn't have time to do anything. But from then on, we were quite interested in him as a curator, but also as a creative partner, because he left us the maximum creative freedom, enormous amounts of trust, and a decent budget to realize it. And that sort of ticked all the important boxes for an experimental artist, I think. And then a couple of years later, we did a scenography for him. And we were absolutely amazed by the impact that a score had on experiencing the work and that actual live performance does. So for the we had this a work called Future Self, where you represent your body image in light, which was specifically developed or created with him in mind, that he would have two people dancing and their body image being represented in light, merged in one cube. So you have two people, or the virtual representation of two persons, two bodies, two human bodies in the same physical space through light. And we got to commission Max Richter, the composer. He's a very sort of theatrical composer, and that was an unbelievable, it's a public work, so it's there for everybody to experience, but we felt it made a huge difference to expose it or have it performed with or by these incredible dancers from Wayne's studio, and then to have an incredible score to it. It's really, it brings out another level. You know, we all know what the film music can do, and we keep doing that. So we keep commissioning or trying to commission choreographers, mostly Wayne, but also to commission score to that, and that's the sort of only bit. But I don't think we've tried one sound work, like to do an audible swarm thing where you locate, it's almost like echolocation. Yeah. It just wasn't as, I imagined it to be very powerful, because, you know, it's our oldest like sense in a way to hear. But I'm more, you know, stick to your guns, you know, leave the audio bit to people who are actually have the full professional understanding of it. And I think we just stick to that stuff.
Thank you.
Call me naive, but I'm really excited to see this, because I actually thought it was an illusion of rain. And when you talked about getting wet, I'm really excited to hear that it's a physical.
Wait until your phone breaks then.
I actually thought that too. I thought it was going to be just like a pretend, but you're right. Yeah, cool.
And I'm really excited. But, you know, I think I spoke to colleagues before, and I said that I feel like I've been there already because of what I've seen on social media. And I guess when you talk about sticking to your guns, do you feel like when you're trying to forecast experiences years ahead in your planning, do you feel, and I hope you say no, but do you feel pressure to create, rather than physical immersive experiences where you do get wet, do you feel the pressure to create immersive digital experiences somewhere in the future, because you feel as though people are so wrapped up in their phones or their digital environments? Like, you see things like, I think gaming is a experience that thrives off of that immersive environment. Do you feel the need to give into that in the future?
Not. I think the opposite. I feel very confirmed in what we do somehow. I can imagine a world where we go out of business, if you like. It's not that, you know, where people just don't see the need, but it's not the world I want to live in, or my kids. So I'm going to do everything I can to make these. I mean, I don't mind. I actually, as in politics, I think that the whole left, if you like, or center left, or normal people, currently confronted with Trump, all this kind of, ooh, how could he do that? I think it's really the wrong reaction. I think you need to work with that brutality almost to counter this bullshit. In politics, this kind of anti-truth campaign needs to be countered with the same resolve, not with the same, you know, malintention. And similar to I feel like the intensity that and this almost this, how do you say, addictivity, like the addictiveness these immersive experiences. I don't mind Rain Room being really loud, and I don't actually, I think it's almost a compliment that they go like, this could be in Disney, because I personally, I think that there are things they do really well, and that this is playing your audio-visual emotional system. Films do that amazingly well with like $200 million budgets. And I think it's a good thing to try to use these tools, if you like, or a similar approach to create an intense experience. I think Rain Room at its time was so successful because it countered it was loud enough. There's amazing, there's of course amazing work by other people which gets overlooked because it's just much more subtle. We have a whole bodies of work which are completely, probably never see the world, the light of a museum day or something, because it's just too obscure. It's not loud, it's not very photogenic. We think it's similarly interesting or important to us. So I don't mind the occasional kind of statement where you do that. I think it shouldn't be the purpose of doing something. So often the question is, do you have Instagram in mind when you make art? And it's like, no, that would be really wrong. But I think I don't want to create for virtual environments unless there's a purpose to it somehow.
Go for it.
So thank you so much for what you're sharing. I think it's given me a much deeper appreciation for Rain Room and the ideas behind your work. So one thing that I love is what you share about the theme of the body and space and the exploration between how we seek connection from, really lifeless objects in a way. Is that a theme that you've always wanted to work with? Is that something that you arrived at through experimentation? Was there a turning point where that came to you, or how did
there was I think the starting point was this, and I'm a pre-internet generation. I was born in 1975, so I didn't know what email was until I was 20. I had my first mobile phone when I was 20. So, I'm proper. I grew up in the good old days, as opposed to my children, as I keep telling them. And I think there was this real strong fascination for this border between the border between analog and digital in that time when people stopped having photographs. When I went on holiday as a 17, 18-year-old, I'd still made photos and brought them to the drugstore and had them developed and then picked them up and stuff. And then that stopped and there was nothing in place. They were shit quality, the first digital cameras. They were absolutely awful, and there was nothing. So that was a space we wanted to somehow own or occupy somehow with work like these printing machines and stuff. So that was like the broader space which fascinated us. And then I think that this body in space came through this audience work, which I showed with Wayne, through, there's a really interesting guy. He's a very scientifically minded, utterly creative person. Who commissioned us there, who was sort of career-wise, he was and still is about 10 years ahead of us, or 15. And that came in like, he's a dancer, whatever it is there. We're not very sporty types. We weren't. I'm going to the gym now, but and at that point we were literally just working the whole time, and that became like that guy in pink or whatever the video is called. That was the turning point when you see. I think we had 15,000 visitors in like 5 days. And that was fascinating to see what impact you could achieve in terms of building rapport, physical relationship with a space, with an object, through sheer movement. And we tested it. There were some, we had all these ideas about this work. And then we, on the first opening day, it was sitting there. And all our assumptions went straight out of the window at our age because nothing happened. The work was still looking at people. And what do people do in front of mirrors? They look back. Nothing happened. It was a static thing. And then we started to, move them, give them some relationship. And the software, then we taught the software to choose other people. So the mirrors were switching attention, and oh man, that pissed people off. They were like, why is it looking at her now? It's like, oh, and then, you know, you start these interactions, and that's where that took off. And that was very instinctive, I think, and then we invited Phil Barnett a year later and asked him, like, what's happening there? And that's where he started to introduce this whole idea of the importance of reading biological motion to our survival. It's an evolutionary thing that, like everything else, it's now being exploited, or is in danger of being exploited.
We've got time for one more question, I think. So there was one behind. Thank you. There you were.
Hi, it's a slightly unformed question, but you talk about the public, but here the Rain Room is a paid space, it's ticketed. How do you feel about your work being between the public realm and this kind of semi-private realm, if you've got any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I do have thoughts about it. I mean, coming from Germany, there's an enormous pretense in Germany versus the Anglo-Saxon world, where, you know, private philanthropy is a thing. In Germany, it's frowned upon that commerce is interfering with the purity of the arts, and I love both. I see weakness with both. I find it really questionable if Mr. Billionaire Developer becomes a curator for public space when it's involuntary, as you see it a lot in the US. I don't think that's a good idea. I don't mind if they pay a professional curatorial agency to do, which is some, you know, field we work in a lot, to do that, to install a bit of quality control. I don't think they're any worse or better than a political gremium like in Statens Konstrat in Sweden, or cultural provincial ministries in Germany. I think that's a sort of hit and miss, as with everything. And I think that that's more of a. I take issue with unchecked curation of public space. I don't think that's great. I do think anything that allows people to experience, not anything, but a lot of, I have, knowing what it takes to run this space, I have full appreciation of a ticketed system. Absolutely, I think it's necessary. You know, you can't make this available for free. And as a narcissist myself, this wouldn't live long, you know, if it did, you know, and this is how the world can continue to experience it. And therefore
it's an opportunity.
It's absolutely an opportunity, and I'd rather have it in. Of course, I would love for this to be for free, but then again, I don't want, you know, a massive, you know, Koch sponsoring it, and therefore then making Koch video shoots in there, which is the price you will pay if you give it to a brand. And this is like having like Louis did. He has a professional curatorial instance, and it's an art collection. I think it's completely fine to charge for it. MoMA does. $30, $25 per pop.
So it's the same. It's the same thing, regardless. Yeah.
Well, no, and yeah, Barbican was for free, and you know, in Sharjah, it's a government-owned thing. They charge like five or €3 or something per person. You know, but I think that's fairly irrelevant. I think it's if it's public, if your encounter with it is involuntary, I think that, I guess that's my sort of compromise answer. I think there is a dire need for some kind of control or curation with some sort of strategy and meaning behind it. I don't think it's okay what happens in public space in certain places when it's just, you know, you get eye cancer when you look at it, and it's like, why is that a thing? Because the guy's buddying up with the art, you know, it's just not okay.
So you'll all get to go in and experience it in a second. If you could, I said the word didactic, but if you could tell people what they're going to experience in 5 words or less, using the most biggest words you could possibly imagine. Go for
I
it.
think just feel for yourself.
Feel for yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, so just go.
Feel for
I think
yourself.
that's a request maybe, because we are in a sort of safe space here. I will ask the, I will try to ask the team to not give an induction. Just go in. Just in groups of, I think, 18. And you can self-organize. I think we don't need to manage. Go in groups of 20, 18 to 20. Try to make sure that you're not more than 7, 8 people at a time inside the rain. You can stand around and try to stand at the back. Don't go, and then that's that. I think the team will help to sort of manage that people don't stay there. At MoMA, people would stay for 40 minutes because they paid $30 and you couldn't get them out. You had to in China, they proposed to cattle, with cattle, they wanted to have a line and just move them through really quick to be efficient. So I think I know that that both the work and human beings have the ability to self-organize. We've experienced it at the Barbican. Sort of 3 minutes is a sort of was the average remain time there, and it's completely fine. You can stay longer, but I think that's the don't walk too fast. Probably, if you don't want to get soaked, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory.
Yeah, and don't do what we did the other day. It was 3 of us, and we were all walking on our own, and we all decided to join forces, and we all got wet. So, choose your friends wisely. All right. Yeah. So
high heels, I think you need to watch out for. If you have high heels like these sort of, how do you call them? I don't know. These like me. No, be careful.
Take them off. I'll take mine off now. Yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, Hannes Koch, thank you so much from Random International. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if you could also put your hands together, please, for our host for this evening, Fenella Kennedy. Thank you very much.